Hello, I'm Andrew Vine, and welcome to another Café Insights with the Insight Bureau. We're here at the Fullerton Hotel in Singapore, and today I'm joined by Dr. Parag Khanna, Senior Research Fellow with the New America Foundation, and he's also the author of two significant books, The Second World, Empires and Influence in the New Global Order, and How to Run the World, Charting a Course to the Next Renaissance. So welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good to see you again here in Singapore. You've been a visitor here a couple of times in the last year. What brings you here this time?
Well, this time I'm speaking at the South Asian Diaspora Convention, and of course Singapore being such a melting pot, but particularly a destination point for South Asians. This is a very good venue to bring together South Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis from all over the world to have a business, academic as well as intellectual dialogue.
Great. Well, I have to say, I've been tracking your travel, and you've been crisscrossing the world like crazy this year. I worked out you've done 95 talks this year alone. We're only in July. Talking about the book, the recent book, is doing keynote speeches, doing presentations to companies. What drives you? What drives you to do all of this?
Well, actually, this is just another form of traveling, and traveling has been my modus operandi for research, for pleasure throughout my entire life. It's the one common denominator since the day I was born, is that I've been traveling. So in that sense, it's still second nature. But what's fantastic now is not only that I get to do research on the ground wherever I am, but to give these presentations as well about how I see global trends unfolding through the lens that I have, which is really picking up information and analysis on the ground about all of these emerging markets.
Well, I know someone described you as someone who travels the world with his eyes wide open. Yeah. And I know some of your travels have verged on the adventure. You go to some pretty out-of-the-way places.
I do, and I do it intentionally, and I think it's important to point out that, you can be talking about a place like Libya today, but I actually decided that Libya was important 5 or 6 years ago, and so I went and spent some time there and put a chapter about Libya in my last book, and I do the same thing for Uzbekistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Colombia. All places that again are popping up in the news or will pop up in the news, because I think that each country really deserves to be assessed and analyzed in its own right, and can have really important macro consequences. So I think traveling with your eyes wide open is an essential tool.
You talk in your first book, The Second World, about there being three superpowers. Obviously lots of developing countries,
right.
But then a second world in the middle.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by the second world?
Absolutely. The second world is really my term for emerging markets, and what it takes into account is that some emerging markets never emerge, and so they can be submerging markets. And what I wanted to explain is that second world countries are those that are caught between the third world that they may be coming from and the first world that they're aspiring to, and there's no guarantee that they'll actually reach there. So if you look at Goldman Sachs' term BRICS, right, or the Next 11, in the Next 11 category, they've added Nigeria, Egypt, Iran, and Pakistan. And quite frankly, when you look at that, to put it in perfectly layman's terms, they must be joking, because they came up with this a year ago, not realizing that the Arab Spring was coming. And today, if you look at Egypt and Pakistan, you surely wouldn't put them in your investor darling list. So when you talk about the second world, you're essentially appreciating that you shouldn't be thinking more than 5 years ahead, and that even in the next 5 years, you could see tremendous turbulence in any one of these countries that could plummet them backwards to where they were 15, 20 years ago. And we're seeing that happening in any number of countries. So they have to go backwards before they can go forwards. I think that terms like BRICS just don't appreciate that dynamic. And the second world was meant to capture that political risk factor.
You talk about a bipolar world government, and then you talk about three superpowers. And do you see this kind of multipolar approach being more prevalent?
Yeah, I think I've been really one of the first people to declare that multipolarity is a fact. I think, and it's important to note the nuance. Many people have, for years, said we will eventually be in a multipolar world. China will eventually become a superpower. India will eventually become a superpower. Brazil is rising. The Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia are rising. I said in my book very explicitly, we live in at least a tripolar world, if not more. And we already live in that world. And what I did was travel around to the ends of the earth to point out that Chinese influence already reaches every corner of the planet. European influence is everywhere. Brazilian influence is growing. Indian as well, and American. So the world is already multipolar. And I think that people have to be very comfortable with that fact, rather than pretending that it's something that's on the horizon. And so I think the prepared investor, the prepared analyst, needs to see that in every market they're looking at, there are already competing forces there on the ground already today.
I mean, since then, the world's kind of moved on, most dramatically with the financial crisis. Has this been the driver behind how to the kind of different focus on how to run the world?
Well,
because you're talking about the perfect storm of
right.
financial, environmental stress, failing states, all that simultaneously conspiring.
Exactly. And so sure enough, that's exactly what has happened. I mean, this book was written basically between the financial crisis and the Arab Spring, but more or less attempted to capture both at the same time. When it comes to the Arab Spring, what this book talks about is the fate of the post-colonial world. And I have a couple of chapters that look at the 100 post-colonial countries out there, many of which, or at least 20 of which are Arab, which are crumbling ever since really their independence half century ago. But I'm also looking at the competing models of success, and that is what the financial crisis has wrought. This very open playing field in which really you don't, emerging markets look at the success of India and China and Brazil, and they say, okay, capital controls, we can do that. Declaring national champions, we can do that. All of these policies that were taboo in the era of a unipolar Washington consensus are now really open today. And so what you find is that there is this competition of models to achieve excellence, to create the right niche in the global supply chain, global division of labor. What I'm witnessing now after the financial crisis is this tremendous amount of willingness to take risks and experiment with new approaches, whatever it takes. So government intervention, state subsidy, state capitalism, all of these things are now open season. And I think that is really part of what the financial crisis has wrought. And that utter sort of free-for-all is really the baseline assumption of how to run the world.
And what we've seen with a higher demand for a voice from ordinary people, I mean, for very long, a minority has been in power, ruling, owning most of the world. The Arab Spring has shown quite dramatically that when people gain some momentum, it's really powerful. Do you see this spreading? Do you see that this is not necessarily going to be contained within the countries of the second world, as you call it, but could even start to come through in the terms of financial stress in the West as well? People are going to start to demand a greater voice for themselves.
Well, the demand for accountability, which is one of the major themes of How to Run the World, is a universal phenomenon. The push for democracy is questionable. So it isn't clear that all societies want to or can be immediately democratic, but they can be more accountable. Okay. And to be more accountable means that there are certain government reforms, there's an emphasis on service delivery and public welfare and things like this, and that there is this voice for the people and a responsiveness to their concerns, whether they are justice and human rights concerns or whether they are economic concerns or job creation is a major concern. You can achieve those things without becoming democratic. So the push for accountability is what is the driving force in the Arab Spring. And you can clearly see that tendency or the spread of that sentiment all over the world happening simultaneously. You can see it in Latin America, you can see it in India and in Pakistan, you can see it in Malaysia today. So really everywhere, even in Singapore, you can see a push for greater accountability and greater voice and participation. It may not lead to more democracy, but it will lead to more accountability. So I am genuinely optimistic. When we see this turbulence that we're seeing today in the Middle East, it's a very good thing. It means that 5 to 10 years from now, there's a good chance that a number of Arab countries, or at least more than today, are going to be better run, are going to focus on their people, are going to try to educate them, are going to work on job creation. That is going to mean that these markets are going to expand and not shrink because, as you said, Andrew, these countries have been controlled by a very narrow slice of people. Therefore, there are limitations to how fast they can grow without inclusiveness. So more inclusive economies or faster growing economies, the Arab world represents 300 million people. If only 15, 20 million have been controlling it, the potential is there for 280 million more people to participate actively in the Arab economic growth story that I hope will unfold in the next 10 years.
Back to the economies of the West, there are very serious issues to deal with in terms of managing debt, having the ability to really have perhaps the same influence on the world that it used to. It seems to be quite topical at the moment to be talking about the US waning in its influence. But I'm not sure that you necessarily agree with that.
Well, the Second World was very much a sort of treatise on American relative decline, and I still believe that relative decline is underway. It's an irrefutable fact that as other markets and countries grow in power and economic size, the United States is going to relatively diminish. Unfortunately, or for better or worse, that is undoubtedly going to continue. What we're seeing in the United States Congress today with the budget debate and the wrangling over the economic future of the country, it's very clear that whatever compromise is reached, and surely there will be one, it's not going to be one that's going to rehabilitate the economy and the infrastructure to the extent that is necessary to make it a broad-based, innovative driver for the world for the 21st century. In certain sectors, the United States will absolutely continue to do that, in information technology, for example. But the speed at which emerging markets, particularly China and India, replicate and adapt those technologies to their own markets and therefore gain that market share faster is absolutely incredible, and I don't think America is prepared to compete with that. So invention and innovation are two different things. America is a truly great inventor, but innovation is being done by everyone now.
And you obviously write and talk about how you see the world developing. How do you hope the world will develop?
No, that's a great question. And what I hope is that we will sort of fight less and less turf wars. Because right now, if you look at the United States, there is this turf war between Washington and New York, or Wall Street and Main Street. The truth is that for the productive and successful societies of the 21st century are going to stop fighting public-private turf wars and start focusing on public-private partnerships as a real mode of governance. So abdicating the notion that there are certain things that only governments can do, should do, or will do. Because many governments, or most governments, will not have the capacity to do those things. So what I see around the world is that successful societies have given up these turf wars, and what I hope is that more will realize that they have to harness and leverage the private sector, civil society, academics, and other sectors to really build a productive economic and political base moving forward.
Right. Well, this is fascinating. We could talk for hours, but let's leave it there. Parag, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.